6, Piedmont. At 9:59 a.m. on the same morning, a K-4 jet helicopter lifted off the concrete of Vandenberg's maximum security hangar, MSH-9, and headed east, toward Arizona. The decision to lift off from an MSH was made by Major Manchek, who was concerned about the attention the suits might draw. Because inside the helicopter were 3 men, a pilot and 2 scientists, and all 3 wore clear plastic inflatable suits, making them look like obese men from Mars, or as one of the hangar maintenance men put it, like balloons from the Macy's parade. As the helicopter climbed into the clear morning sky, the 2 passengers in the belly looked at each other. One was Jeremy Stone, the other Charles Burton. Both men had arrived at Vandenberg's just a few hours before. Stone from Stanford and Burton from Baylor University in Houston. Burton was 54, a pathologist. He held a professorship at Baylor Medical School and served as a consultant to the NASA Manned Spaceflight Center in Houston. Earlier, he had done research at the National Institutes in Bethesda. His field had been the effects of bacteria on human tissues. It is one of the peculiarities of scientific development that such a vital field was virtually untouched when Burton came to it. Though men had known germs caused disease since Henle's hypothesis of 1840, by the middle of the 20th century, there was still nothing known about why or how bacteria did their damage. The specific mechanisms were unknown. Burton began, like so many others in his day, with Diplodocus pneumonia, the agent causing pneumonia. There was great interest in pneumococcus before the advent of penicillin in the 40s. After that, both interest and research money evaporated. Burton shifted to Staphylococcus aureus, the common skin pathogen responsible for pimples and boils. At the time he began his work, his fellow researchers laughed at him. Staphylococcus, like pneumococcus, was highly sensitive to penicillin. They doubted Burton would ever get enough money to carry on his work. For 5 years, they were right. The money was scarce, and Burton often had to go begging to foundations and philanthropists. Yet he persisted patiently, elucidating the coat of the cell that caused a reaction in host tissues, and helping to discover the half-dozen toxins secreted by the bacteria to break down tissue, spread infections, and destroy red cells. Suddenly, in the 1950s, the first penicillin-resistant strains of staph appeared. The new strains were virulent and produced bizarre deaths, often by brain abscess. Almost overnight, Burton found his work had assumed major importance. Dozens of labs around the country were changing over to study staph. It was a hot field. In a single year, Burton watched his grant appropriations jumped from $6,000 a year to $300,000 soon afterwards. He was made a professor of pathology. Looking back, Button felt no great pride in his accomplishments. It was, he knew, a matter of luck, of being in the right place and doing the right work when the time came. He wondered what would come of being here, in this helicopter now. Sitting across from him, Jeremy Stone tried to conceal his distaste for Burton's appearance. Beneath the plastic suit, Burton wore a dirty plaid sports shirt with a stain on the left breast pocket. His trousers were creased and frayed, and even his hair, Stone felt, was unruly and untidy. He stared out the window, forcing himself to think of other matters. 50 people, he said, shaking his head, dead within 8 hours of the landing of Scoop 7. The question is one of spread. Presumably airborne, Burton said. Yes, presumably. Everyone seems to have died in the immediate vicinity of the town, Burton said. Are there reports of deaths farther out? Stone shook his head. I'm having the army people look into it. They're working with the highway patrol. So far, no deaths have turned up outside. Wind? A stroke of luck, Stone said. Last night, the wind was fairly brisk, 9 miles an hour to the south, and steady. But around midnight, it died. Pretty unusual for this time of year, they tell me. But fortunate for us. Yes, Stone nodded. We are fortunate in another way as well. There is no important area of habitations for a radius of nearly 112 miles. Outside that, of course, there is Las Vegas to the north, San Bernardino to the west, and Phoenix to the east. Not nice, if the bug gets to any of them. But as long as the wind stays down, we have time. Presumably, Stone said. For the next half hour, the two men discussed the vector problem, with frequent reference to the sheaf of output maps drawn up during the night by Vandenberg's computer division. The output maps were highly complex analysis of geographic problems. In this case, the maps were visualizations of the southwestern United States, weighted for wind directions and populations. A note on the output maps. These 3 maps are intended as example of the staging of computer-based output mapping. The first map is relatively standard, with the addition of computer coordinates around population centers and other important areas. The second map has been rated to account for wind and population factors, and is consequently disordered. The third map is a computer projections of the effects of wind and population in a specific scenario. None of these output maps is from the Wildfire Project. They are similar, but they represent output from a CBW scenario, not the actual wildfire work. Courtesy General Autonomics Corporations. Discussion then turned to the time course of death. Both men had heard the tape from the van. They agreed that everyone at Piedmont seemed to have died quite suddenly. Even if you slit a man's throat with a razor, Burton said, You won't get death that rapidly. Cutting both carotids and jugulars still allows 10 to 40 seconds before unconsciousness, and nearly a minute before death. At Piedmont, it seems to have occurred in a second or two. Burton shrugged. Trauma, he suggested. A blow to the head. Yes, or a nerve gas. Certainly possible. It's that, or something very much like it, Stone said. If it was an enzymatic block of some kind, like arsenic or strychnine, we'd expect 15 to 30 seconds, perhaps longer. But a block of nervous transmission, or a block of the neuromuscular junctions, or cortical poisoning, that could be very swift. It could be instantaneous. If it is a fast-acting gas, Burton said, it must have high diffusibility across the lungs. Or the skin, Stone said. Mucous membranes, anything, any porous surface. Burton touched the plastic of his suit. If this gas is so highly diffusible... Stone gave a slight smile. We'll find out soon enough. Over the intercom, the helicopter pilot said, Piedmont approaching, gentlemen. Please advise. Stone said, circle once and give us a look at it. The helicopter banked steeply. The two men looked out and saw the town below them. The buzzards had landed during the night and were thickly clustered around the bodies. I was afraid of that, Stone said. They may represent a vector for an infectious spread, Burton said. Eat the meat of infected people and carry the organisms away with them. Stone nodded, staring out the window. What do we do? Gas them, Stone said. He flicked on the intercom to the pilot. Have you got the canisters? Yes, sir. Circle again and blanket the town. Yes, sir. The helicopter tilted and swung back. Soon the two men could not see the ground for the clouds of pale blue gas. What is it? Kerosene, Stone said. Highly effective in low concentrations on aviary metabolisms. Birds have a high metabolic rate. They are creatures that consist of little more than feathers and muscle. Their heartbeats are usually about 120, and many species eat more than their own weight every day. The gas is an uncupola. Yes, it hit them hard. The helicopter banked away, then hovered. The gas slowly cleared in the gentle wind, moving off to the south. Soon they could see the ground again. Hundreds of birds lay there. A few flapped their wings spastically, but most were already dead. Stone frowned as he watched. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew he had forgotten something, or ignored something, some fact, some vital clue that the birds provided and he must not overlook. Over the intercom, the pilot said, Your orders, sir. Go to the center of the main street, Stone said, and drop the rope ladder. You are to remain 20 feet above ground. Do not put down. Is that clear? Yes, sir. When we have climbed down, you are to lift off to an altitude of 500 feet. Yes, sir. Return when we signal you. Yes, sir. And should anything happen to us, I proceed directly to Wildfire. the pilot said, his voice dry. Correct. The pilot knew what that meant. He was being paid according to the highest Air Force pay scales. He was drawing regular pay plus hazardous duty pay, plus non-wartime special services pay, plus mission over hostile territory pay, plus bonus airtime pay. He would receive more than $1,000 for this day's work, and his family would receive an additional $10,000 from the short-term life insurance should he not return. There was a reason for the money. If anything happened to Burton and Stone on the ground, the pilot was ordered to fly directly to the wildfire installations and hover 30 feet above ground until such time as the wildfire group had determined the correct way to incinerate him and his airplane in mid-air. He was being paid to take a risk. He had volunteered for the job, and he knew that high above, circling at 20,000 feet, was an Air Force jet with air-to-air missiles. It was the job of the jet to shoot down the helicopter should the pilot suffer a last-minute loss of nerve and fail to go directly to wildfire. "Don't slip up," the pilot said. "Sir." The helicopter maneuvered over the main street of the town and hung in mid-air. There was a rattling sound, the rope ladder being released. Stone stood and pulled on his helmet. He snapped shut the sealer and inflated his clear suit, puffing it up around him. A small bottle of oxygen on his back would provide enough air for 2 hours of exploration. He waited until Burton had sealed his suit, and then Stone opened the hatch and stared down at the ground. The helicopter was raising a heavy cloud of dust. Stone clicked on his radio. All set. All set. Stone began to climb down the ladder. Burton waited a moment, then followed. He could see nothing in the swirling dust, but finally felt his shoes touch the ground. He released the ladder and looked over. He could barely make out Stone's suit, a dim outline in a gloomy, dusky world. The ladder pulled away as the helicopter lifted into the sky. The dust cleared. They could see. "Let's go," Stone said. Moving clumsily in their suits, they walked down the main street of Piedmont. 7. An unusual process. Scarcely 12 hours after the first known human contact with the Andromeda strain was made at Piedmont, Burton and Stone arrived in the town. Weeks later, in their debriefing sessions, both men recalled the scene vividly and described it in detail. The morning sun was still low in the sky. It was cold and cheerless, casting long shadows over the thinly snow-crusted ground. From where they stood, they could look up and down the street at the gray, weathered wooden buildings. But what they noticed first was the silence, except for a gentle wind that whined softly through the empty houses. It was deathly silent. Bodies lay everywhere, heaped and flung across the ground in attitudes of frozen surprise. But there was no sound, no reassuring rumble of an automobile engine, no barking dog, no shouting children. Silence. The two men looked at each other. They were painfully aware of how much there was to learn, to do. Some catastrophe had struck this town, and they must discover all they could about it. But they had practically no clues, no points of departure. They knew in fact only two things. First, that the trouble apparently began with the landing of Scoop 7. And second, that death had overtaken the people of the town with astonishing rapidity. If it was a disease from the satellite, then it was like no other in the history of medicine. For a long time the men said nothing, but stood in the street, looking about them, feeling the wind tug at their oversized suits. Finally Stone said, "Why are they all outside in the street? If this was a disease that arrived at night, most of the people would be indoors." "Not only that," Button said, "they're mostly wearing pajamas. It was a cold night last night. You'd think they would have stopped to put on a jacket or a raincoat, something to keep warm. Maybe they were in a hurry." "To do what?" Button said. "To see something," Stone said, with a helpless shrug. Button bent over the first body they came to. "Odd," he said. "Look at the way this fellow is clutching his chest. Quite a few of them are doing that." Looking at the bodies, Stone saw that the hands of many were pressed to the chests, some flat, some clawing. "They didn't seem to be in pain," Stone said. "Their faces are quite peaceful. Almost astonished, in fact," Button nodded. "These people look cut down, caught in mid-stride, but clutching their chests." "Coronary?" Stone said. "Doubt it. They should grimace. It's painful. The same with pulmonary embolism. If it was fast enough, they wouldn't have time, perhaps. But somehow I think these people died a painless death. Which means they are clutching their chests because they couldn't breathe," Stone said. Button nodded. "It's possible. We are seeing asphyxiation. Rapid, painless, almost instantaneous asphyxiation. But I doubt it. If a person can't breathe, the first thing he does is loosen his clothing, particularly around the neck and chest. Look at that man there. He's wearing a tie, and he hasn't touched it. And that woman, with the tightly buttoned collar." Button was beginning to regain his composure now. After the initial shock of the town, he was beginning to think clearly. They walked up to the van, standing in the middle of the street, its light still shining weakly. Stone reached in to turn off the lights. He pushed the stiff body of the driver back from the wheel and read the name on the breast pocket of the parka, Sean. The man sitting rigidly in the back of the van was a private named Crane. Both men were locked in rigor mortis. Stone nodded to the equipment in the back. "Will that still work?" "I think so," Button said. "Then let's find the satellite. That's our first job. We can worry later about. He stopped. He was looking at the face of Sean, who had obviously pitched forward, hard onto the steering wheel at that moment of death. There was a large arc-shaped cut across his face, shattering the bridge of his nose and tearing the skin. "I don't get it," Stone said. "Get what?" Button said. "This injury. Look at it." "Very clean," Button said. "Remarkably clean, in fact. Practically no bleeding." Then Button realized. He started to scratch his head in astonishment, but his hand was stopped by the plastic helmet. "A cut like that," he said. "On the face, broken capillaries, shattered bone, torn scalp veins. It should bleed like hell." "Yes," Stone said. "It should. And look at the other bodies. Even where the vultures have chewed at the flesh, no bleeding." Button stared with increasing astonishment. None of the bodies had lost even a drop of blood. He wondered why they had not noticed it before. Maybe the mechanisms of action of this disease. "Yes," Stone said. "I think you may be right." He grunted and dragged Sean out of the van, working to pull the stiff body from behind the wheel. "Let's get that damned satellite," he said. "This is really beginning to worry me." Button went to the back and pulled Crane out through the rear doors, then climbed in as Stone turned the ignition. The starter turned over sluggishly, and the engine did not catch. Stone tried to start the van for several seconds, then said, "I don't understand. The battery's low, but it should still be enough." "How's your gas?" Button said. There was a pause, and Stone swore loudly. Button smiled and crawled out of the back. Together they walked up the street to the gas station, found a bucket and filled it with gas from the pump, after spending several moments trying to decide how it worked. When they had the gas, they returned to the van, filled the tank, and Stone tried again. The engine caught and held. Stone grinned. "Let's go." Button scrambled into the back, turned on the electronic equipment, and started the antenna rotating. He heard the faint beeping of the satellite. The signal's weak, but still there. Sounds over to the left somewhere. Stone put the van in gear. They rumbled off, swerving around the bodies in the street. The beeping grew louder. They continued down the main street, past the gas station and the general store. The beeping suddenly grew faint. "We've gone too far. Turn around." It took a while for Stone to find reverse on the gear shift, and then they doubled back. Tracing the intensity of the sound, it was another 15 minutes before they were able to locate the origin of the beeps to the north, on the outskirts of the town. Finally, they pulled up before a plain single-story wood frame house. A sign creaked in the wind. "Dr. Alan Benedict." "Might have known," Stone said. "They take it to the doctor." The two men climbed out of the van and went up to the house. The front door was open, banging in the breeze. They entered the living room and found it empty. Turning right, they came to the doctor's office. Benedict was there, a pudgy, white-haired man. He was seated before his desk, with several textbooks laid open. Along one wall were bottles, syringes, pictures of his family, and several others, showing men in combat uniforms. One showed a group of grinning soldiers. The scrawled words, "For Benny, from the boys of 87, Anzio." Benedict himself was staring blankly toward a corner of the room, his eyes wide, his face peaceful. "Well," Button said, "Benedict certainly didn't make it outside." And then they saw the satellite. It was upright, a sleek, polished cone 3 feet high, and its edges had been cracked and seared from the heat of re-entry. It had been opened crudely, apparently with the help of a pair of pliers and chisel that lay on the floor next to the capsule. "The bastard opened it," Stone said. "Stupid son of a bitch." How was he to know? "He might have asked somebody," Stone said. He sighed. "Anyway, he knows now. And so do 49 other people." He bent over the satellite and closed the gaping, triangular hatch. "You have the container?" Button produced the folded plastic bag and opened it out. Together they slipped it over the satellite, then sealed it shut. "I hope to hell there's something left," Button said. "In a way," Stone said softly, "I hope there isn't." They turned their attention to Benedict. Stone went over to him and shook him. The man fell rigidly from his chair onto the floor. Burton noticed the elbows and suddenly became excited. He leaned over the body. "Come on," he said to Stone. "Help me." "Do what?" "Strip him down." "Why?" "I want to check his lividity." "But why?" "Just wait," Button said. He began unbuttoning Benedict's shirt and loosening his trousers. The two men worked silently for some moments, until the doctor's body was naked on the floor. "There," Button said, standing back. "I'll be damned," Stone said. There was no dependent lividity. Normally, after a person died, blood seeped to the lowest points, drawn down by gravity. A person who died in bed had a purple back from accumulated blood. But Benedict, who had died sitting up, had no blood in the tissues of his buttocks or thighs, or in his elbows, which had rested on the arms of the chair. "Quite a peculiar finding," Button said. He glanced around the room and found a small autoclave for sterilizing instruments. Opening it, he removed the scalpel. He fitted it with a blade, carefully, so as not to puncture his airtight suit, and then turned back to the body. "We'll take the most superficial major artery and vein," he said, "which is the radial, at the wrist." Holding the scalpel carefully, Button drew the blade along the skin of the inner wrist, just behind the thumb. The skin pulled back from the wound, which was completely bloodless. He exposed fat and subcutaneous tissue. There was no bleeding. Amazing. He cut deeper. There was still no bleeding from the incision. Suddenly, abruptly, he struck a vessel. Crumbling red-black material fell out onto the floor. "I'll be damned," Stone said again. "Clotted solid," Button said. "No wonder the people didn't bleed." Button said, "Help me turn him over." Together, they got the corpse onto its back, and Button made a deep incision into the medial thigh, cutting down to the femoral artery and vein. Again, there was no bleeding, and when they reached the artery, as thick as a man's finger, it was clotted into a firm reddish mass. Incredible. He began another incision, this time into the chest. He exposed the ribs, then searched Dr. Benedict's office for a very sharp knife. He wanted an osteotome, but could find none. He settled for the chisel that had been used to open the capsule. Using this, he broke away several ribs to expose the lungs and the heart. Again, there was no bleeding. Button took a deep breath, then cut open the heart, slicing into the left ventricle. The interior was filled with red, spongy material. There was no liquid blood at all. "Clotted solid," he said. "No question. Any idea what can clot people this way?" "The whole vascular system? 5 quarts of blood? No." Button sat heavily in the doctor's chair and stared at the body he had just cut open. "I've never heard of anything like it. There's a thing called disseminated intravascular coagulation, but it's rare and requires all sorts of special circumstances to initiate it." "Could a single toxin initiate it?" "In theory, I suppose. But in fact, there isn't a toxin in the world." He stopped. "Yes," Stone said. "I suppose that's right." He picked up the satellite's designated Scoop 7 and carried it outside to the van. When he came back, he said, "We'd better search the houses." "Beginning here?" "Might as well," Stone said. It was Button who found Mrs. Benedict. She was a pleasant-looking middle-aged lady sitting in a chair, with a book on her lap. She seemed about to turn the page. Button examined her briefly, then heard Stone call to him. He walked to the other end of the house. Stone was in a small bedroom, bent over the body of a young teenage boy on the bed. It was obviously his room. Psychedelic posters on the walls, model airplanes on a shelf to the one side. The boy lay on his back in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. His mouth was open. In one hand, an empty tube of model airplane cement was tightly clenched. All over the bed were empty bottles of airplane dope, paint thinner, Tups. Stone stepped back. "Have a look." Button looked in the mouth, reached a finger in, touched the now hardened mass. "Good God," he said. Stone was frowning. "This took time," he said. "Regardless of what made him do it, it took time. We've obviously been oversimplifying events here. Everyone did not die instantaneously. Some people died in their homes. Some got out into the street, and this kid here. He shook his head. Let's check the other houses. On the way out, Button returned to the doctor's office, stepping around the body of the physician. It gave him a strange feeling to see the wrist and leg sliced open, the chest exposed, but no bleeding. There was something wild and inhuman about that, as if bleeding were a sign of humanity. Well, he thought, perhaps it is. Perhaps the fact that we bleed to death makes us human. For Stone, Piedmont was a puzzle challenging him to crack its secrets. He was convinced that the town could tell him everything about the nature of the disease, its course and effects. It was only a matter of putting together the data in the proper way, but he had to admit, as they continued their search, that the data were confusing. A house that contained a man, his wife, and the young daughter, all sitting around the dinner table. They had apparently been relaxed and happy, and none of them had time to push back their chairs from the table. They remained frozen in attitudes of congeniality, smiling at each other across the plates of now rotting food. And flies. Stone noticed the flies, which buzzed softly in the room. He would, he thought, have to remember the flies. An old woman, her hair bright, her face creased. She was smiling gently, and she swung from a noose tied to a ceiling rafter. The rope creaked as it rubbed against the wood of the rafter. At her feet was an envelope, in a careful, neat, unhurried hand. To whom it may concern. Stone opened the letter and read it. The day of judgment is at hand. The earth and the waters shall open up, and mankind shall be consumed. May God have mercy on my soul and upon those who have shown mercy to me. To hell with the others. Amen. Burton listened as the letter was read. Crazy old lady, he said. Senile dementia. She saw everyone around her dying, and she went nuts. And killed herself? Yes, I think so. Pretty bizarre way to kill herself, don't you think? That kid also chose a bizarre way, Burton said. Stone nodded. Royal Thompson, who lived alone. From his greasy coveralls, they assumed he ran at the town gas station. Roy had apparently filled his bathtub with water, then knelt down, stuck his head in, and held it there until he died. When they found him, his body was rigid, holding himself under the surface of the water. There was no one else around, and no sign of struggle. Impossible, Stone said. No one can commit suicide that way. Lydia Everett, a seamstress in the town, who had quietly gone out to the backyard, sat in a chair, poured gasoline over herself, and struck a match. Next to the remains of her body, they found the scorched gasoline can. William Arnold, a man of 60, sitting stiffly in a chair in the living room, wearing his World War I uniform. He had been a captain in that war, and he had become a captain again, briefly, before he shot himself through the right temple with a Colt 45. There was no blood in the room when they found him. He appeared almost ludicrous, sitting there with a clean, dry hole in his head. A tape recorder stood alongside him, his left hand resting on the case. Button looked at Stone questioningly, then turned it on. A craving, irritable voice spoke to them. "You took your sweet time coming, didn't you? Still, I am glad you have arrived at last. We are in need of reinforcements. I tell you, it's been one hell of a battle against the Hun. Lost 40% last night. Going over the top, and 2 of our officers are out with the rot. Not going well, not at all. If only Gary Cooper was here. We need men like that, the men who made America strong. I can tell you how much it means to me, with those giants out there in the flying saucers. Now, they're burning us down, and the gas is coming. You can see them die, and we don't have gas masks. None at all. But I won't wait for it. I am going to do the proper thing now. I regret that I have but one life to kill for my country." The tape ran out, but it was silent. Button turned it off. "Crazy," he said. "Stark raving mad." Stone nodded. "Some of them died instantly, and the others went quietly nuts. But we seem to come back to the same basic question. Why? What was the difference? Perhaps there's a graded immunity to this bug," Button said. "Some people are more susceptible than others. Some people are protected, at least for a time." "You know," Stone said, "there was that report from the flybys, and those films of a man alive down here. One man in white robes. You think he is still alive?" "Well, I wonder," Stone said, "because if some people survived longer than others, long enough to dictate a taped speech, or to arrange a hanging, then you have to ask yourself if someone maybe didn't survive for a very long time. You have to ask yourself if there isn't someone in this town who is still alive." It was then that they heard the sound of crying. At first, it seemed like the sound of the wind. It was so high and thin and reedy, but they listened, feeling puzzled at first, and then astonished. The crying persisted, interrupted by little hacking coughs. They ran outside. It was faint and difficult to localize. They ran up the street, and it seemed to grow louder. This spurred them on. And then abruptly the sound stopped. The 2 men came to a halt, gasping for breath, chest heaving. They stood in the middle of the hot, deserted street and looked at each other. "Have we lost our minds?" Button said. "No," Stone said. "We heard it all right." They waited. It was absolutely quiet for several minutes. Button looked down the street at the houses, and the Jeep van parked at the other end in front of Dr. Benedict's house. The crying began again, very loud now, a frustrated howl. The two men ran. It was not far, 2 houses up on the right side. A man and a woman lay outside on the sidewalk, falling and clutching their chests. They went past them and into the house. The crying was still louder. It filled the empty rooms. They hurried upstairs, clambering up, and came to the bedroom. A large double bed, unmade, a dresser, a mirror, a closet, and a small crib. They leaned over, pulling back the blankets from a small, very red-faced, very unhappy infant. The baby immediately stopped crying, long enough to survey their faces, enclosed in the plastic suits. Then it began to howl again. "Scared hell out of it," Burton said. "Poor thing." He picked it up gingerly and rocked it. The baby continued to scream. Its toothless mouth was wide open, its cheeks purple, and the veins stood out on its forehead. "Probably hungry," Burton said. Stone was frowning. "It's not very old. Can't be more than a couple of months. Is it a he or a she?" Burton unwrapped the blankets and checked the diapers. He. And he needs to be changed and fed. He looked around the room. "There's probably a formula in the kitchen." "No," Stone said. "We don't feed it. Why not? We don't do anything to that child until we get it out of this town. Maybe feeding is part of the disease process. Maybe the people who weren't hit so hard or so fast were the ones who hadn't eaten recently. Maybe there's something protective about this baby's diet. Maybe." He stopped. "But whatever it is, we can't take a chance. We've got to wait and get him into a controlled situation." But inside, he knew that Stone was right. But he also knew that the baby hadn't been fed for at least 12 hours. No wonder the kid was crying. Stone said, "This is a very important development. It's a major break for us, and we've got to protect it. I think we should go back immediately. We haven't finished our head count." Stone shook his head. "Doesn't matter. We have something much more valuable than anything we could hope to find. We have a survivor." The baby stopped crying for a moment, stuck its finger in its mouth, and looked questioningly up at Burton. Then, when he was certain no food was forthcoming, he began to howl again. "Too bad," Burton said. "He can't tell us what happened." "I'm hoping he can," Stone said. They parked the van in the center of the main street, beneath the hovering helicopter, and signaled for it to descend with the ladder. Burton held the infant and Stone held the scoop satellite. Strange trophies, Stone thought, from a very strange town. The baby was quiet now. He had finally tired of crying and was sleeping fitfully, awakening at intervals to whimper, then sleep again. The helicopter descended, spinning up swirls of dust. Burton wrapped the blankets about the baby's face to protect him. The ladder came down and he climbed up with difficulty. Stone waited on the ground, standing with the capsule in the wind, and dust and thumpy noise from the helicopter. And suddenly he realized that he was not alone on the street. He turned and saw a man behind him. He was an old man with thin gray hair and a wrinkled, worn face. He wore a long nightgown that was smudged with dirt and yellowed with dust, and his feet were bare. He stumbled and tottered towards Stone. His chest was heaving with exertion beneath the nightgown. "Who are you?" Stone said. But he knew the man in the picture, the one who had been photographed by the airplane. "You," the man said. "Who are you?" "You did it." "What is your name?" "Don't hurt me. I'm not like the others." He was shaking with fear as he stared at Stone in his plastic suit. Stone thought, "We must look strange to him, like men from Mars, men from another world. Don't hurt me." "We won't hurt you," Stone said. "What is your name?" "Jackson. Peter Jackson, sir. Please don't hurt me." He waved to the bodies in the street. "I'm not like the others." "We won't hurt you," Stone said again. "You hurt the others." "No, we didn't. They're dead." "We are nothing." "You're lying," he shouted, his eyes wide. "You're lying to me. You're not human. You're only pretending. You know I'm a sick man. You know you can pretend with me. I'm a sick man. I'm bleeding. I know. I've had this. He faltered, and then doubled over, clutching his stomach and wincing in pain. "Are you all right?" The man fell to the ground. He was breathing heavily, his skin pale. There was sweat on his face. "My stomach," he gasped. "It's my stomach." And then he vomited. It came up heavy, deep red, rich with blood. "Mr. Jackson." But the man was not awake. His eyes were closed and he was lying on his back. For a moment Stone thought he was dead. But then he saw the chest moving, slowly, very slowly, but moving. Burton came back down. "Who is he?" "Our wandering man. Help me get him up." "Is he alive, so far?" "I'll be damned," Burton said. They used the power winch to hoist up the unconscious body of Peter Jackson, and then lowered it again to raise the capsule. Then slowly, Burton and Stone climbed the ladder into the belly of the helicopter. They did not remove their suits, but instead clipped on a second bottle of oxygen to give them another 2 hours of breathing time. That would be sufficient to carry them to the wildfire installation. The pilot established a radio connection to Vandenberg, so that Stone could talk with Major Manchek. "What have you found?" Manchek said. "The town is dead. We have good evidence for an unusual process at work." "Be careful," Manchek said. "This is an open circuit. I am aware of that. Will you order up a 712? "I'll try." "You want it now?" "Yes, now." "Piedmont?" "Yes." "You have the satellite?" "Yes, we have it." All right, Manchek said. I'll put through the order. 8. Directive 712. Directive 712 was a part of the final wildfire protocol for action in the event of a biologic emergency. It called for the placement of a limited thermonuclear weapon at the site of exposure of terrestrial life to exogenous organisms. The code for the directive was cautery, since the functions of the bomb was to cauterize the infection, to burn it out, and thus prevent its spread. As a single step in the wildfire protocol, cautery had been agreed upon by the authorities involved: executive, state, defense, and AEC, after much debate. The AEC, already unhappy about the assignment of a nuclear device to the wildfire laboratory, did not wish cautery to be accepted as a program. State and defense argued that any above-ground thermonuclear detonation, for whatever purpose, would have serious repercussions internationally. The President finally agreed to Directive 712, but insisted that he retain control over the decisions to use a bomb for cautery. Stone was displeased with this arrangement, but he was forced to accept it. The President had been under considerable pressure to reject the whole idea, and had compromised only after much argument. Then, too, there was the Hudson Institute study. The Hudson Institute had been contracted to study possible consequence of cautery. Their report indicated that the President would face 4 scenarios, in which he might have to issue the cautery order. According to degree of seriousness, the scenarios were: 1. A satellite or manned capsule lands in an unpopulated area of the United States. The President may cauterize the area with little domestic uproar and small loss of life. The Russians may be privately informed of the reasons for breaking the Moscow Treaty of 1963, forbidding above-ground nuclear testing. 2. A satellite or manned capsule lands in a major American city. The example was Chicago. The cautery will require destruction of a large land area and a large population, with great domestic consequences and secondary international consequences. 3. A satellite or manned capsule lands in a major neutralist urban center. New Delhi was the example. The cautery will entail American intervention with nuclear weapons to prevent further spread of disease. According to the scenarios, there were 17 possible consequences of American-Soviet interactions following the destructions of New Delhi. 12 had directly to thermonuclear war. 4. A satellite or manned capsule lands in a major Soviet urban center. The example was Stalingrad. Cautery will require the United States to inform the Soviet Union of what has happened, and to advise that the Russians themselves destroy the city. According to the Hudson Institute scenario, there were 6 possible consequences of American-Russian interactions following this event, and all 6 led directly to war. It was therefore advised that if a satellite fell within Soviet or Eastern Bloc territory, the United States not inform the Russians of what had happened. The basis of this decision was the predictions that a Russian plague would kill between 2 and 5 million people, while combined Soviet-American losses from a thermonuclear exchange involving both first and second strike capabilities would come to more than 250 million persons. As a result of the Hudson Institute report, the President and his advisors felt that control of cautery and responsibility for it should remain within political, not scientific hands. The ultimate consequence of the President's decisions could not, of course, have been predicted at the time it was made. Washington came to a decision within an hour of Manchek's report. The reasoning behind the President's decisions has never been clear, but the final result was plain enough. The President elected to postpone calling Directive 712 for 24 to 48 hours. Instead, he called out the National Guard and cordoned off the area around Piedmont for a radius of 100 miles, and he raided. 9. Flat Rock. Mark William Hall, M.D., sat in the tight rear seat of the F-104 fighter and stared over the top of the rubber oxygen masks at the file on his knees. Leavitt had given it to him just before takeoff. A heavy, thick wad of paper bound in gray cardboard. Hall was supposed to read it during the flight, but the F-104 was not made for reading. There was barely enough room in front of him to hold his hands clenched together, let alone open a file and read. Yet Hall was reading it. On the cover of the file was stenciled "Wildfire," and underneath an ominous note: "This file is classified, top secret. Examination by unauthorized persons is a criminal offense punishable by fines and imprisonment up to 20 years and $20,000. When Leavitt gave him the file, Hall had read the note and whistled. "Don't you believe it," Leavitt said. "Just a scare." "Scare? Hell," Leavitt said. "If the wrong man reads this file, he just disappears." "Nice." "Read it," Leavitt said, "and you'll see why." The plane flight had taken an hour and 40 minutes, cruising in eerie perfect silence at 1.8 times the speed of sound. Hall had skimmed through most of the file, reading it. He had found was impossible. Much of its bulk of 274 pages consisted of cross-references and inter-service notations, none of which he could understand. The first page was as bad as any of them. This is page 1 of 274 pages. Project Wildfire. Authority, NASA, AMC. Classifications: Top Secret, NTK basis. Priority, National, DX. Subject: Initiation of high security facility to prevent dispersions of toxic extraterrestrial agents. Crossfile. Project Clean. Project Zero Contaminants. Project Cautery. Summary of file contents. By executive order, constructions of a facility initiated January 1965. Planning stage, March 1965. Consultants, Fort Detrick and General Dynamics, EBD. July 1965. Recommendations for multi-story facility in isolated locations for investigations of possible or probable contaminatory agents. Specifications reviewed August 1965. Approval with revisions same date. Final drafts drawn and filed AMC under Wildfire. Copies Dietrich Hawkins. Choice of site Northeast Montana. Reviewed August 1965. Choice of site Southwest Arizona. Reviewed August 1965. Choice of site Northwest Nevada. Reviewed September 1965. Nevada site approved October 1965. Constructions completed July 1966. Funding NASA, AMC Defense. Unaccountable reserves. Congressional appropriations for maintenance and personnel under same. Major alterations, Millipore filters. See page 74. Self-destruct capacity, nuclear. Page 88. Ultraviolet irradiators, removed. See page 81. Single man hypothesis. Old man hypothesis, page 255. Personnel summaries have been eliminated from this file. Personnel may be found in AMC Wildfire files only. The second page listed the basic parameters of the system, as laid down by the original Wildfire Planning Group. This specified the most important concept of the installations, namely that it would consist of roughly similar descending levels, all underground. Each would be more sterile than the one above. This is page 2 of 274 pages. Project Wildfire. Primary parameters. There are to be 5 stages. Stage 1. Non-decontaminated but clean. Approximates sterility of hospital operating room or NASA clean room. No time delay of entrance. Stage 2. Minimal sterilization procedures. Hexachlorophene and methitol bath. Not requiring total immersions. 1 hour delay with clothing change. Stage 3. Moderate sterilizations procedures. Total immersions bath. UV irradiations. Followed by 2 hour delay for preliminary testing. Febrile infections of UR and GU tracts. Permitted to pass. Viral symptomatology permitted to pass. Stage 4. Maximal sterilizations procedures. Total immersions in 4 baths of biocaine, monochlorophene, xanthozine, and profene, with intermediate 30-minute UV and IR irradiations. All infections halted at this stage on basis of symptomatology or clinical signs. Routine screening of all personnel. 6-hour delay. Stage 5. Redundant sterilization procedures. No further immersions or testing, but destruct clothing 2 times per day. Prophylactic antibiotics for 48 hours. Daily screen for super infections, first 8 days. 2. Each stage includes 1. Resting quarters, individual. 2. Recreation quarters, included movie and game room. 3. Cafeteria automatic. 4. Library with main journals transmitted by Xerox or TV. From main library level 1. 5. Shelter, a high security antimicrobial complex with safety in event of level contaminations. 6. Laboratories. A. Biochemistry with all necessary equipment for automatic amino acid analysis, sequence determinations, OR potentials, lipid and carbohydrate determinations on human, animal, other subjects. B. Pathology with EM, phase and LM mercatomes, and curing rooms. 5 full-time technicians each level. 1 autopsy room. 1 room for experimental animals. C. Microbiology with all the facilities for growth, nutrient analytic, immunologic studies, subsections bacterial, viral, parasitic, other. D. Pharmacology with material for dose relations and receptor site, specificity studies of known compounds, pharmacy to include drugs as noted in appendix. E. Main room, experimental animals, 75 genetically pure strands of mice, 27 of rat, 17 of cat, 12 of dog, 8 of primate. F. Non-specific room for previously unplanned experiments. 8 surgery for care and treatment of staff, including operating room facilities for acute emergencies. 9. Communications for contact with other levels by audio-visual and other means. Count your pages. Report any missing pages at once. Count your pages. As Hall continued to read, he found that only on level 1, the topmost floor, would there be a large computer complex for data analysis, but that this computer would serve all other levels on a time-sharing basis. This was considered feasible since for biologic problems, real time was unimportant in relation to computer time, and multiple problems could be fed and handled at once. He was leafing through the rest of the file, looking for the part that interested him, the odd man hypothesis, when he came upon a page that was rather unusual. This is page 255 of 274 pages. By the authority of the Department of Defense, this page from a high-security file has been deleted. The page is number 255. The file is coded wildfire. The subject matter deleted is odd man hypothesis. Please note that this constitutes legal deletions from the file which need not be reported by the reader. Machine score review below. 255 wildfire. 255. Hall was frowning at the page, wondering what it meant, when the pilot said, "Dr. Hall." "Yes?" "We have just passed the last checkpoint, sir. We will touch down in 4 minutes. All right." Hall paused. "Do you know where exactly we are landing?" I believe, said the pilot, that it is Flat Rock, Nevada. I see, Hall said. A few minutes later, the flaps went down, and he heard a whine as the airplane slowed. Nevada was the ideal site for wildfire. The Silver State ranks 7th in size, but 49th in population. It is the least dense state in the Union after Alaska, particularly when one considers that 85% of the state's 440,000 people live in Las Vegas, Reno, or Carson City. The population density of 1.2 persons per square mile seems well suited for projects such as wildfire, and indeed many have been located there. Along with the famous atomic site at Vinton Flats, there is the Ultra Energy Test Station at Martindale, and the Air Force Medivator unit near Los Gatos. Most of these facilities are in the southern triangle of the state, having been located there in the days before Las Vegas, swelled to receive 20 million visitors a year. More recently, government test stations have been located in the northwest corner of Nevada, which is still relatively isolated. Pentagon classified lists include 5 new installations in that area. The nature of each is unknown.